Vikes now, Dustin Baker. The Vikings are 7-1 heading to a Week 10 date with the Buffalo Bills. And it feels like we're going to have a week of will he or won't he on Josh Allen and his elbow playing for the Bills. He is the front runner for the NFL's MVP on the NFL's front running team to win the Super Bowl, at least per odds makers. And that's on the Vikings' agenda this week. If Allen plays, I do not think they'll win this game. I doubt you do either. I'm starting to shift my opinion that they don't know if they'll get their asses beat. I think 2 weeks ago I thought that going into Highmark Stadium would be a slaughterhouse. I think I might dial that back, and then especially if Case Keenum plays, they might even truck around and win the thing. We shall see. But first, I want to put the win over Washington to bed with the surprises that came out of that game. And then tomorrow we'll talk to Josh Fry for about 10 minutes about Washington and 10 minutes about Buffalo. So let's jump into 7 surprises about Vikings Commanders, all from the Vikings perspective, because I don't give a shit about the Commanders. But these aren't in any order. Surprise, surprise. But the first one, for me, undoubtedly, is the performance of a Caleb Evans, who is a rookie from the 4th round that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah traded draft capital to get this dude. And so his performance was tremendous. He had 2 tackles for loss, a humongous, ginormous pass breakup on 4th down, and he was playing because Cameron Dantzler hurt his ankle on a bullshit penalty where Dantzler went in for a tackle, but they claimed that he low blocked a dude. It was garbage. It was a terrible scenario for him because he got hurt and got flagged for, 15 yards? Just trash. Nonetheless, Caleb Evans, the bright lights came on for him. Bada bing, he showed up, and he looks like a dude who's worthy of a sequel performance, and it looks like he'll get that against the Bills. What a what a welcome to the NFL type of thing, your first start against Buffalo. But it was big because Evans over Booth shined when called upon, and it also casts him versus Booth, because Booth was a 2nd rounder in April's draft. Where the hell is he? Why didn't he play? Why was it Evans who got the nod? Ultimately, it seems they made the right choice because Evans played well. Now, I'll say this over and over until this show no longer exists. It was a single game, and for rookies, he could come out and have like a 25 PFF grade next week. But last week, when called upon, he did the trick, and that's what you yearn for a rookie, especially at cornerback. But this is huge, Evans' 1-game performance, because if it continues, it changes the scope of what the Vikings will need in April's draft. What do I mean by that? Well, before Sunday, when we thought Evans was just a dude who was going to develop and maybe play in a year or two, you looked at him on the roster. You looked at Andrew Booth, who's MIA, who isn't really playing at all. I mean, he's not MIA, he's on the team, but he's not playing. And he's healthy now. He's been healthy for about, 2 or 3 weeks. And because those guys were iffy about long-term prognosis, are these guys going to actually play, needing a cornerback next April was palpable because Patrick Peterson isn't young. Cameron Dantzler is pretty good, but he's not a shutdown corner. And with an aging Peterson, even though he doesn't look like he's aging this year, you have to start to plan for the future. And if Evans was going to be ho-hum and Booth flat out doesn't play, then, we're back in the spot where we're drafting a high-round cornerback for like the 6th time in 9 years or whatever it is. But if this continues, let's say Dantzler is indeed hurt, doesn't play against the Bills, Evans fires up another performance, and it turns out, like Dara saw, this guy is the real deal. You need not draft a cornerback in round 1 or 2, especially if Booth comes along and plays well. So it changes the scope. If Evans is good, what the Vikings will do in April's draft in terms of necessity at cornerback. The next one is not as cool as Evans' big game. It was Ezra Cleveland's utterly sinful game. He just got torched. And this was right after we thought he turned the corner. You didn't have to worry about him. You never talked about him, which means he was doing his job. But he had a 0.0 pass blocking grade. And it wasn't, a typo or PFF didn't forget about him. It was just that he stunk. He wasn't good. And that's less than ideal, especially for a Vikings offensive line that was finally top 10, top 12 for overall performance. It took a step back, and you could see it vividly on the field. Cousins was under duress, and like I said yesterday, thankfully, he has experience with that, 4 years worth of it with the Vikings, so it wasn't, doomsday that when he was getting ransacked, he didn't just go into the turtle shell because he's been here before. We'll see how Cleveland responds, but he, per the numbers, was not good in Washington, the worst game of his career, especially from a pass blocking perspective. We'll see how he rebounds against a ferocious Bills front seven. The next one is something I touched on yesterday, sort of, is just Justin Jefferson not coming down with 50-50 balls. Now, this is nitpicking. Admittedly, the guy had 7 catches for 115 yards and a touchdown. The Vikings would not have won the football game without him. So overall, Jefferson's day was like a B+. But if he wants to be the best wide receiver in the game and nibble at Tyreek Hill's 2,000-yard incoming season, getting those 50-50 balls, which he usually does, has got to be like a mainstay if he wants to be elite. Now, in the grand scheme of things, again, he had a marvelous afternoon, and he usually does have marvelous afternoons. But if he wants to be the best in the world, there was 2 or 3 50-50 balls that he needs to come down with because that's who he is. And a homage to my talking point yesterday is this game could have been a quasi-blowout if wide receivers made their usual caliber of catches, including Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. We'll see coming up in against Buffalo and so forth, if Jefferson indeed gets more of the 50-50 balls. Because, to reiterate, he made some fabulous catches against the Commanders. It's just that there were a couple, it's like, God, he usually comes down with those. I want to see if he becomes a staple of getting every single one, or, if he's just not quite that. He's not going to get every 50-50 ball, because it concerns me that Cousins won't throw it to him in those risky situations, because, for the most part, Cousins is pretty standoffish at times when it comes to uncorking it into tight spots. Number 4 is Danielle Hunter is hitting his groove. He had a couple sacks against the Commanders. Suddenly, his Pro Football Focus grade is 79.8. And we had valid concerns for the first 5 weeks or so. It's like, how long is this dude going to take to adjust to a 3-4 defense? Well, I'm here to report he did it. Just like Ed Donatel predicted. It was a customary acclimation to a new style defense. We knew Hunter could do it. He just wasn't, the gang-busting 4-3 Hunter that Mike Zimmer had groomed and developed over, 6-7 seasons, and he's been healthy. That's another side note, is that Hunter hasn't missed any games yet, and he's becoming a force as a 3-4 defender, just like we all drew it up. And that's marvelous, because this team's going to start to hone its schemes, its techniques, its everything to get ready for a playoff push. And Hunter is getting good again at just the right time. And just a complimentary on the other side, Zadarius Smith. Hunter's at his best when he had Everson Griffin at his side. Go figure. And now it's being replicated with Zadarius Smith, who is playing, I think, better than Griffin. Well, Griffin was pretty deadly in 2017, but playing very well, we'll put it that way. The next one, it was just a, how I always talk about those you can feel it in your bones moments, is that when Kirk Cousins, we didn't know at the time, had the wind knocked out of him and he was on the ground rolling around, that was a first of its kind moment. What do I mean by that? He came out of the game for a play and Nick Mullins threw a little dinker pass, but that was the first time as a quarterback of the Vikings that Cousins came out of a game and missed a play when it wasn't, supremely planned. Of course, there's been resting the starters in the 2019 season where Sean Mannion played. Cousins didn't play that game. The COVID game against the Packers when they got their asses spanked and, Mond got in there for a series, that was planned. And then a couple kneel downs. We used to have those back in the 2019 season. I think there were 2 or 3 occasions where Sean Mannion came in at the end of the game and simply kneeled the ball down. It was against the Chargers and the Raiders. And if you care, I don't know if you remember that Chargers game in 2019, the Vikings won 39-10. That was the last time they truly beat the shit out of another team. It's been 3 years since they've won by, I think, more than 17 points. So they're due. Not going to happen this week, but eventually these O'Connell Vikings should, if it's in their best interest, beat the hell out of some teams, because we haven't had a Vikings ass beating in a good way for 3 years. I digress. It felt weird to see Cousins get hurt and come out of the game because it's never happened, at least with the Vikings. Winding down, this one's huge. They couldn't run the football, but they still won. Usually, under the Zimmer regime, 8 years worth of it, if the Vikings couldn't run the football, that was it. it would turn into a stale festival of shit and just get demolished. The Colts game comes to mind in 2016 at US Bank Stadium. You remember those Vikings games with Zimmer in charge where, was going to be one of those afternoons. There weren't very many of them, but during the Zimmer era, if the Vikings couldn't establish the run, they weren't going to win. And in this game, they rushed for less than 60 yards and still won. I pulled the numbers, and throughout Vikings history, all the way back to 1961, when they rush for 60 or fewer yards, their win-loss is 16-82. Now, that's not like a uniquely Vikings thing. That's football in general. But a rule of thumb is that if the Vikings, most of the time, don't rush for more than 50, 60 yards, they're going to lose. They've only won 16% of games in franchise history when having 60 yards or less on the ground. It didn't matter against the Commanders. They really couldn't get any offense going after the first drive. But it didn't murder them that they couldn't run the football. And that's a big deal because, you want to be able to run the football in any game, and especially in the postseason, but they can find a way to get it done if it's not working. And kudos to Washington's run defense. We know going into the game that was the strongest part of their entire roster, their entire coaching staff was run defense, and it played out in real time. The Vikings could not get things going on the ground, but they still won. That's the takeaway. And finally, it would be a dereliction of a Vikings YouTube show if I didn't bring up TJ Hawkinson, Thomas Jane Hawkinson, that's his real name, on a surprises show. We were told in the wee 48 hours before the Commanders game that, hey, Hawkinson's ready, he's going to be mixed in. And usually when you hear that, it's fodder. They're just saying that to throw off the opponent. And if you would have asked me Sunday morning, I would say, yeah, Hawkinson will probably get about 4 targets and he'll work his way in. But this dude got 9, which is the most by any Vikings tight end since 2018 when your guy Kyle Rudolph was nearing the end of the peak of his powers. But Hawkinson was an immediate contributor after, I think, doing his homework with David Blau over the week. And it won the Vikings the game. It would be hard to imagine them finding a way to come through in the fourth quarter without TJ Hawkinson on that roster. So props to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah for pulling the trigger. And it's just tantalizing to know that this Hawkinson gent is going to be a part of the team for the next 5 to 8 years. And it only costed, 2 rounds next year and 1 round the year after that to grab him. So it's only been 1 week, kind of like Caleb Evans' performance, but the Hawkinson trade for 1 week feels fabulous and even can be directly linked to the win over the Commanders. I'll run through them real quick. Evans. It was a bust-out performance that's important because if it continues, then they need not draft a quarterback with high-round draft capital, and we've seen that over and over, drafting corners and hoping for the best. Ezra Cleveland was horrible. Let's see how fast he responds. Justin Jefferson couldn't grab all the 50-50 balls despite a very good game in general. Danielle Hunter is hitting his groove, just like the world kind of said. It's going to take a while for him to get used to the new system. We've arrived. He's doing just that. Kirk Cousins coming out of the game was panic-worthy, and rightfully so because it was the first time that had happened when it wasn't planned. The Vikings couldn't run the football, but they still won. That's a huge deal going forward because they have now the blueprint to get it done if they get stifled on the ground. And then TJ Hawkinson. It was just incredibly surprising that he would be ready that soon and then make an impact, seemingly help Vikings win the game. Tomorrow, usual guest, Josh Fry. He's the editor of PurplePTSD.com. We'll talk to him about this win for a few minutes and get into some of the Bills stuff. That's all I got. And Skol, baby.